Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the monthly webinar from Business Licenses, LLC. My name is Doug Starr. I'm your webinar moderator. Thank you for joining us today. Business Licenses is a business license-specific software advisory and outsourcing firm. We provide timely information through a community-oriented website. We also have software to speed license processing, provide critical advice through our research attorneys and paralegals, and we have a business license compliance service that includes preparing and remitting licenses, managing the reconciliation process, and responding to and answering business license-related questions. You may notice on your screen that Business Licenses has recently released our enterprise set of services under the new brand Business License Solutions, aimed at serving the large business market. Each month we co-host an informational webcast which features an important and helpful business license topic or even a tool. This month's webcast is an insider's view of license and permit research presented by our staff attorney and director of research, Lorraine Cody. But let me quickly handle some administrative details before we get started. First of all, it's good for you to input your audio pin, so in the event we try to interact with you at the end of the presentation, we can actually communicate with you. And you'll find that on your right side toolbar on this GoToWebinar tool that you're experiencing right now. All of your phones are muted right now, but even though that's going on throughout the presentation, we encourage you to submit a question at any time, and you can do that by clicking on the question tab on the right toolbar and submitting a question in the dialog box. You can also use the chat feature to do the same thing or communicate with others that are on the webinar. We'll either address your questions as you ask it, or we'll save it till the end of the presentation if we find that to be in a more appropriate time to take some time with your question. So, before we get started, we'd like to find a little bit out about the audience. So, would you please look at your polls, and you'll find over on that right toolbar a question that says, what department does your business license activity actually reside in? And if you could pick from the multiple choice box, that would be great, and we'll give you a little answer on who these people are and where they reside. All right, we're still awaiting some of the poll results. Poll is in progress, and we've got some people voting now. So your choices are tax and accounting department, the legal or regulatory department, you use an outside firm, or some other resource actually handles the research activity. And we'll give everybody just a moment to continue. We'll also have a second poll to follow this one as soon as we've captured everybody's votes here, and it looks like we've got just about everybody in. So here are our results. It tells us that about 3/4 of you are in the tax and accounting department, 20% are in legal or regulatory, 13% are in another department, and 2% use an outside firm. So let's now also go to a second question that will help Lorraine tailor her comments to the audience. And this talks about how many locations or products you research annually. And your choices are 1 to 12 annually, 13 to 50 annually, or 51 plus annually. So if you'd just register your vote there, that'll give us a good idea of how to address some of Lorraine's comments. All right, we're getting close to the end of the results here. We've got about 3/4 of you that have logged a response. All right, and so the response from the group is about 50% of you handle more than 51 annual research projects of some sort. 25% are between 13 and 50, and 25% are between 1 and 12. So we've got a group that is fairly research-laden at this point. So thank you for participating in the poll. What I'd like to do is introduce Lorraine and give you a little bit of background on her, and then we'll let her launch into what I hope will prove to be a fairly compelling discussion about research, and then we'll save the end of the call to talk to you, take some of your questions, and actually try to answer some specific issues that you've got. So a little bit about Lorraine Cody. She is an accomplished attorney with significant experience in business licensing, also commercial litigation, insurance defense, antitrust, and real estate malpractice. Lorraine has worked with business licenses for over a year. She's served as a council person for the town of Southeast New York. She was publicly elected to a town board and served a 4-year term, working closely with legal counsel and land use planners and consultants. So Lorraine has a good bit of public experience. Lorraine was admitted to the New York State Bar and U.S. District Court for New York. She's received her Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Russell Sage College and graduated magna cum laude from Brooklyn Law School. Lorraine manages our internal team of attorneys and paralegals providing research for our mid-market and large companies and tackles the most challenging research projects that we handle usually on her own. So let me present Lorraine Cody and our January webinar, Researching and Acquiring the Right Licenses. Lorraine?
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to discuss the process of identifying, researching, and obtaining business licenses. There are several different steps in this process, and all are essential. Skipping any of them can lead to mistakes, inaccurate licensing decisions, and waste of resources. The first step involves identifying the licenses applicable to your business. There are several components to this that we will discuss today. Understanding your business locations, defining the activities your business engages in, and how that business gets done. The next step is how to research the licenses that are applicable to your business, where to look, what sources to check. Proper research will put you in a position to efficiently apply for and obtain the licenses your business needs. And finally, we will discuss what to expect regarding license issuance so you can ensure that all your hard work pays off and your business actually receives the licenses you've applied for and what to do with them. Before we begin, please bear with me while I indulge in some lawyer speak. Our discussion today is intended to be general. Please remember that every licensing situation is unique and extremely fact-driven. While you may have a situation that seems very similar to something we have discussed, there may be additional factors that may lead to a different result in your situation. Finally, none of the statements that I make today is intended to be used or interpreted as legal advice. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, moving on. Many businesses view their business activities too narrowly when trying to identify what licenses or permits they need. You need to look at your business with fresh eyes and break everything that is involved in your business down to an elemental level. A good place to start is the question of location. Where do you operate your business? New businesses have the additional hurdle of zoning approvals and obtaining certificates of occupancy. But even existing businesses may have location-driven licensing issues. Have you added any new activities at your location or made any changes at your location? That could trigger a host of issues such as signage permits, change of use zoning issues, outdoor storage permits, and local business licenses. Did you open a new location? You may need additional branch licenses, depending on your type of business, or maybe you're in a jurisdiction that requires a separate business license for each location. Do you have locations you don't even know you had? This may sound ridiculous, but believe it or not, it does happen. For example, do you have an employee that works from home and his address is listed on your website as a location or maybe even as a sales office? Or maybe he keeps certain business-related property at his home, such as sales literature or equipment. Many municipalities require home occupation licenses for certain activities conducted out of residences, and zoning approval may be required if a certain percentage of the area of the residence is used for business purposes. A different kind of example is the store within a store scenario, which is becoming increasingly popular. Recently, a client came to us to find out what licenses they might need because their product was being offered by a major retailer in an existing store. Normally, this would cause licensing issues for the supplier company, but this new arrangement involved the supplier company subletting space from the retailer, and only their displays and products would be offered in that particular space. In a few municipalities, most notably New Jersey, this required a new certificate of occupancy for the subleased space, even though there was no real change of use and no structural changes. This can also lead to a need for a local business license for this so-called location. Not having a location may be just as relevant in the licensing inquiry. Contractors, for instance, often perform services in localities where they do not have a physical location. Do they still need a local business license? The answer is maybe. It depends on each municipality. Some only require licenses if your business has a physical location within the municipality, and some require a license even if you don't. There are some municipalities where the contractor or service company generates over a certain threshold of gross revenue in that municipality. They are deemed to have a location within the municipality and would need a business license. There are many businesses out there that have either they have unnecessary business licenses that they don't need because they do not have a location in the municipality, or don't have licenses when they should because they don't know one is required even without a physical location. Also relevant to the location subject, make sure you know which municipal authority has jurisdiction over your locations. This may sound obvious, but you might be surprised at how often businesses run into problems with this. For example, a business that had a Las Vegas address spent a good deal of time trying to find out what licenses and approvals they needed from Las Vegas city government. But as it turns out, their location was actually in an unincorporated area of Clark County, and they did not need anything from the city of Las Vegas. I've seen many businesses going through the process of trying to obtain licenses from both county and city when they only needed city licenses, and of course the inverse, which is the business located within a city that obtains the city licenses but forgets to find out if they need any sort of county license. Make sure you know which municipal authorities have jurisdiction over your business. One method that we utilize here to accomplish this is geocoding locations. You can also try using various map services like Google Maps, and of course, if all else fails, you should call the municipality you think you're located in and give them the street address to verify. Bear in mind that the proper authority may not be the government unit you think it is. In fact, it may not be a government unit at all. For instance, in Pennsylvania, many municipalities outsource their functions to a third-party company. So a contracting company trying to determine if their contracting, licensing, or registration may need to first figure out which third party handles those requirements. Similarly, there are municipalities which have business privilege tax requirements, but a third-party tax collector handles it. We have seen instances where we've called the municipality and we're told, we don't have any business privilege licenses. Then found out there are requirements, but they're handled by a third party, and what the official actually meant was that they don't handle it there. Of course, it doesn't have to be a third party. In this day of economic problems, some municipalities may be consolidating functions with other municipalities and or county-level governments.
All right, so Lorraine, we're going to do another quick poll here if we can, just to try and get a sense for where people are in terms of what they think their licensing status is. So we're launching another quick poll here, and the question is, if I were to have my business license portfolio audited, it would reveal the following. And your choices are, I think I might be under-licensed, I am probably over-licensed, my licenses appear to be just right, or I'm really not sure what it would reveal. And then, Lorraine, you can kind of take a sense of what the audience has here and maybe formulate your discussion around what the poll tells us. So we'll wait just another moment here to gather the results. All right. So we've got just about everybody in. And on this poll, it looks like we're split between three things. The audience says about a third of you think you might be under-licensed, about a third think you're licensed just right, and about a third are not quite sure what it would reveal. So, Lorraine, let's, before we move to that, we did get a question from the audience with regard to Nexus as well, and your discussion about trying to figure out locations. And I know this is a deep topic, but if you could address this just to some degree to put this question to rest. Is sales tax nexus the same as business license nexus? Said differently, I'm assuming, if you have sales tax responsibility, does it mean that you necessarily have business license responsibility?
Well, that's actually it's a fairly complicated question in that most people involved in licensing know that nexus can be a little tricky. These are not exactly coterminous terms. I would say if you have sales tax nexus, or rather if you have business license nexus, you have sales tax nexus. It does not work the other way around necessarily, since there are different factors. It's very fact-driven in terms of what your business does and where it does as to whether or not you would have business license nexus. But I think you could flip it around and do it the other way, where if you have the business license nexus, chances are really, really good you're going to have a sales tax nexus.
Okay, but it's not a question that can be answered universally across the board as true false. It typically takes some research from you to get that question answered properly.
Right, and it's very fact-driven, so you need to know something about the business and the location and the jurisdiction that you're dealing with.
Okay. Well, good. Well, let's move back. I think I probably showed this slide a little early, but let's talk about the proper business definition for a moment.
Okay, sure. The next aspect of proper business definition is to ask yourself, what does your business do? In order to accurately research what licenses your business may need, you have to look at your business with fresh eyes. Ask yourself, what do you sell, service, or distribute? You need to break these activities down to their essential terms. You may view your business as a grocery store, but in today's world, that may encompass many types of products and services. For example, do you sell money orders or wire money? Do you cash checks? These potentially involve licensing issues at the federal and state level. Do you sell tobacco or liquor? These products are heavily regulated and raise special tax and licensing issues. Make sure you look around and know each and every product or class of products you sell or each type of service you offer. Many times, these are ancillary products or services and are not considered by business owners as their main business and are overlooked in licensing research. And remember, licensing research gets stale and needs to be periodically refreshed. You may have a good handle on all your business activities and researched them properly several years ago. But has the licensing or regulatory environment changed since then? Consider the recent changes in California's money transmitter license laws. Companies that have been in business for years and never needed a money transmitter license because their services were considered data processing suddenly fall within the purview of this legislation and are scrambling to obtain a money transmitter license. These include companies you might not really consider to be money transmitters, such as Facebook, for instance. In a time when many of us have difficulty keeping up with our email and other social media sites, the task of keeping abreast of licensing and regulatory developments can seem especially daunting. There may also be licensing issues raised by incidental activities that your business performs or by byproducts that your business generates. A good example of this was a large grocery store in California that had a backup generator to prevent food loss in a power outage. The store had overlooked the applicable federal and state environmental emission licenses it needed to be able to operate and maintain that generator. The same store had also overlooked a state license that was required to recycle used cooking oil that it produced as a result of some in-store cooking. We all recognize that industry lines are being blurred as banking and tax preparation is offered at Walmart. You can get a Starbucks cup of coffee at your local Target and maybe a slice of pizza at your grocery store. Those are not the main business activities, but they are activities that may require a license. Service-oriented businesses must also analyze their business activities, since they may encounter similar problems. For instance, maybe your business engages in contracting services and you sell and install equipment. But do you also service that equipment? Such activity may involve different licensing concerns. Okay, moving on to the next aspect of properly defining your business. You need to consider, how does your business do what it does? How does it operate? You need to look at how your business obtains the products it sells. What is your supply chain and what is your distribution chain? Look at everything coming in and going out and determine who is responsible at each step of the process. The best way to explain this is by illustration. Some time ago, a business came to us looking for research into what licenses they would need to operate vending machines that would sell fresh gourmet food. There were federal, state, and local applicable licenses and regulations, of course, but the company did not anticipate that they would need a full retail food establishment license from the city for the vending machine operation, and that any commissary that supplied food for the machines would also need a retail food establishment license, whether owned by the company or by a third party. Also, depending on how the food was transported and stored en route to the vending machines, the company might need a state refrigerated warehouse license. Knowing what licenses might be needed for distribution and storage helped the company decide which functions they wanted to handle themselves and which would be easier and cheaper to outsource. This company made the smart move of using business license research as a planning tool and how to set up and operate their business. Such analysis is extremely relevant when an existing business is considering expansion into a new area of business activities. How can a business accurately estimate the costs involved in expansion if it does not consider licensing and regulatory requirements and their attendant costs? I've done countless business license audits, and I can tell you I've never done an audit on a sizable company where we did not identify a licensing gap. And on the flip side, in numerous audits, we discovered licenses the company had but actually did not need. These gaps and unnecessary licenses represent wasted time and money. When it happens, that oftentimes licensing authorities will return a license application if the business does not actually need the license. I can assure you that very often the authority will just process the application and take the money. Remember, these licensing fees are revenue generating, and in these economic times, municipalities are happy and eager to take your money.
So Lorraine, what is your experience that when you have seen an audit of business licenses, that there are frequently businesses that are over-licensed because they got poor advice from the licensing authority or the municipality, or is that a fairly rare occurrence?
It's not as frequent an occurrence as when we find a gap, but we often find over-licensing, and I think that a big part of it is sort of what harm can it do over inclusiveness, you know, just an abundance of caution, really, as attorneys would say. But at the same time, some of these licenses have reporting requirements. They can have, you know, fines if you don't keep up with them. And overall, it's just a waste of time and money. I think that people don't truly research licensing needs thoroughly, and they may not be able to adequately interpret the requirements. Do I fall within this definition? Do I qualify as having a location? And they err on the side of over-inclusiveness.
And you'll typically find that the city clerk that you talk to has a tendency to err on the side of over-inclusiveness as well?
Oh, most definitely. It may be on some level that the staff that is actually processing these applications, it's literally a rubber stamp. They are not looking at the statute or the code to see if it's applicable to this particular business. Because remember, chances are they don't have every detail in front of them in terms of what your business activities are. But I would say more often than not, they're just going to put it through.
Okay, and so you're stuck maintaining a license that you really don't need, paying a fee that may be nominal, but you really don't need to pay, and then all of a sudden when you take that license away, you get subjected to the scrutiny of the people that were used to getting the revenue for that license.
Exactly. That's
I gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, good. So let me just interrupt the presentation for one more second to address a couple of questions that I've gotten. Several people have asked if we'll be sending out a copy of the webinar via email or if they can pick up the webinar in some way. We will post it to the Business License Solutions website and send all of you an email with instructions on how you can get to this as well. So you'll be able to pick up the slides and even a recording of what we've discussed today. So Lorraine, why don't you give us some research pointers?
Okay. All right, so the next step, now that you've identified the areas of your business that may need licensing, it's time to turn to researching. Researching involves both figuring out who the appropriate licensing authority would be and whether the license is actually applicable to your business. If you've accurately identified your locations or service areas, then you know which municipalities have jurisdiction. We usually start from the top down, state, county, and then local, because many times the higher level license may be a prerequisite to obtaining the local license. Part of identifying the proper authority is figuring out which department or official handles any applicable licensing. Websites are a great place to start. They give you an idea of the government structure, and they can lead you to the applicable statutes, municipal codes, or administrative regulations that will help you interpret the applicability of the license. Also, many websites for county and local governments have general form pages which can give you a broad overview of the licenses and permits available, and looking at the forms tells you which agencies or offices administer the licenses. Do your research before calling the authority so that you know what questions to ask and to avoid repeat calls. Also, some preparation will help you decipher if you're talking to the right person and if that person knows what they're talking about. It's important to remember that government officials are not going to do your job for you. It's never a good idea to simply cold call an agency and attempt to describe your business and rely on them to identify which licenses you may need. From my experience on the other side of the equation, as a local publicly elected official, I will tell you that county and local governments are usually understaffed and poorly paid, and office staff are not always well versed in licensing requirements. If you've done your research beforehand, then you should have an idea of what licenses you may need. Having explored the municipality's website beforehand can be very helpful. I usually have the website open in front of me when I call for several reasons. It allows me to reference forms that may be on the site during my conversation, and increasingly municipalities have staff directories online, so I can get an idea of who I'm talking to and if they're qualified to answer my questions. If I've called the clerk's office and gotten an individual who does not appear on the directory, it may be that person is covering someone else's desk and does not normally work in that department. While my experience with the staff at most municipalities is that they truly want to be helpful, it's best to take human nature into account and to remember that people generally do not like to admit that they don't know the answer to your question. The trick is to determine whether you're receiving accurate information. Having done your research ahead of time will help. When we train researchers here, I advise them to always be courteous, deferential, and to avoid backing the staff member into a corner. If there's a discrepancy in what the staff member is telling you, it's always better to address it as your own mistake, or to simply say, you know, I'm a little confused. I see this application or ordinance on your website, and I'm not sure I'm interpreting it correctly. You never want to give the staff member the impression that you think they don't know what they're talking about. When I'm in a situation where I know the person on the other end of the phone has no clue, I will usually say something along the lines of, I may have called the wrong department. I wonder if you could direct me to the department that might handle this. Such an approach will give the staff member a way to save face and pass you on to someone more knowledgeable. It's our policy here at Business Licenses to always check the municipal code or ordinances. These can be found on many municipal websites as well as many codification company websites such as MuniCode, General Code Services, to name just a couple. There are several reasons we check this. In my opinion, the most important reason is that if law is on the books, it must be addressed. It may be the municipality does not enforce certain ordinances. Maybe it seemed like a good idea when they enacted it, but then implementing the ordinance was too complicated or too expensive, and they just let it go. But from a legal perspective, if the law is in force and it's not been repealed, it can be enforced at any time. In my local government experience, if a business coming into our town to do something we might not want, you can be sure we'll be looking through the code to find out if there's some provision in there to limit or prevent the activity. Another use for looking through municipal codes and ordinances is to check the fee schedules. If a municipality has a license or permit fee listed on that schedule, you can be fairly certain they have a license or permit to go with it and that they enforce it. Moreover, these fee schedules have to be reenacted annually, so the information there is fairly fresh. And it just gives you another source to go to, another thing to check up on your research.
So we got a question, which is pretty straightforward question that we've all run into. So what if the jurisdiction or location that you're dealing with is either so small or so ill-equipped that they don't have a website? What do you do?
Well, in that situation, there are several things you can do. You can always get contact information from either the county. You can also look at state websites. They will offer, who's the mayor, who's the clerk, and give you phone numbers. Obviously, they're not going to have a detailed website that you can get their code and their forms and things along those lines. At that point, you will have to heavily rely on telephone contact. You will have to call them and, give them a very clear and concise description of what it is you want to come in there to do, and being courteous, let them know your only goal is to be compliant, and you'll have to rely on it that way. We usually, in that situation, will ask, can you please fax us or email us? Very oftentimes, they don't even have email, but fax us a copy of the form, fax us a copy of the ordinance that backs that up. And usually they're very, very cooperative. It may take you some time to get in touch with them, but I have to say that we find that in the vast majority of times, they will send you what you asked for, and they will walk you through the process.
Well, and I understand why you always say get started early then.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's flip to our next topic, which is efficiently obtaining the licenses. And then we're getting a few questions that we'll save a few of these for the end to try and keep our momentum on the topics that we have here. So take it away. Tell us about obtaining the licenses.
Okay, so at this point, you're now ready to actually apply for the licenses your business needs. And you want to make sure the process is as efficient and painless as possible. As in most things, preparation and organization is key in efficiently obtaining the licenses you need. You should know beforehand how and where to apply, who needs to apply, office hours, days the office is open, and do you need to apply in person. For instance, it can be very frustrating and a huge waste of time if a contractor who needs a contractor registration in a locality to work there shows up to register but doesn't have the required qualified agent and attended state license. It's just a waste of resources and time. You also need to know what the fees are for the license and what payment methods are acceptable. Many people make the mistake of not giving themselves sufficient time to get through the application process. You need to bear in mind that in order to complete the application, you may need to gather information from other departments or locations within your business, and that can take time. You can't necessarily ask another department because you're behind the 8 ball to hurry up and give you the information that you need. Furthermore, many licenses, especially regulated licenses, have prerequisites such as insurance or bond requirements, background or criminal checks, fingerprints, other licenses, and proper identification. Satisfying these requirements can be time-consuming and you need to ensure that you've allocated sufficient time to get through the entire process. The next and last step is the issuance of the license. This is the goal we've worked so hard to attain. But having applied for the license does not mean you get to sit back and relax. As with most things, follow through is very important. You should have a good idea of how long it will take to process your application and whether a certificate, license, or permit is actually issued. Once you get that wondrous piece of paper you've worked so hard for, you want to know what you're supposed to do with it, if anything. Does your license need to be displayed in a storefront or carried by your employees? And of course, it's never too soon to start planning for the future by finding out what is the license term and the process for renewal. We're going to include a spreadsheet with the webinar that may be used as an organizational tool. I like to have this information in front of me when I'm talking to a municipality and during the application process. It can help you keep track of what licenses are needed from which authorities for your business's various locations. It can help you memorialize who you spoke to for accountability purposes at the licensing authority, and how, where, and when to apply, how to pay, what prerequisites there are, and the processing time involved. It's a lot of information to keep track of. I also find that this can be used as a list of licenses and a reference to keep track of whether you actually received the license and when it's time to renew. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground here today, and I hope you found this information useful. I guess we're going to take some questions now, and if we don't get to a question that you may have, or if you have a particularly detailed and specific question, please feel free to contact me by phone or email. Okay? And
so, well, thank you, Lorraine. So there's a couple of things that we've got a handful of questions here, and then maybe a couple of things that we could clarify for the audience. Number one, Lorraine has been kind enough to prepare what we're fondly calling a research checklist, which is a spreadsheet that will actually walk you through in a nice, concise format the steps that she goes through to collect the research that she needs for a particular issue. I want to go back a moment to this discussion of going after the right licenses and the peculiarities and taking enough time and how all that has mixed together. I remember one project that we worked on together was a project for a very unique secondhand dealer. And with a secondhand dealer, one of the things that came into play was just not the research with the local licensing authority, but there were several other parties involved. Tell us about that if you can take a minute.
Sure. In dealing with situations like that, and with the rise of the vending machines, as I call them now, that are recycling phones and cash for gold, secondhand dealer licensing issues are becoming very relevant. You not only have to deal with the licensing authority, you have to deal with police departments and other regulatory authorities. There will be reporting requirements, holding time periods as to how long you have to hold on to that merchandise. We have a client at this point that there are certain, it's actually very technologically advanced. They have a camera as well as fingerprinting going on when you submit your electronic device and get cash from the machine for it. But you're going to have to coordinate in that instance with various different agencies, whether it's state police, local police, as well as the municipality, in terms of what are the requirements for conducting that type of business. And there's going to be some overlap, and it can also tend to be, in some instances, very confusing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of folks that you need to contact with these unusual and regulated licenses beyond the licensing authority itself. Okay, we do have a handful of other questions that have come in. One of the questions was about subcontractors' licenses in municipalities and states where you wish to perform your services, and that's probably a deeper question than you can answer very specifically. Mm-hmm. But tell us about some of the challenges of dealing with subcontractor licenses.
Well, I mean, looking at the topic as a whole, contractor licensing in general, depending on the type of the work that you're doing, you're going to have to look at the state level first to determine what licenses do they regulate. In some instances, you'll have general contractor, you'll have specialty contractors, trades, and they'll have different requirements. In many states, the localities, the local levels of government, will be the ones that will license those contractors. And there will be different licensing involved for subcontractors versus for general contractors. So we different monetary triggers. For some general contracting licenses, you need to have, that license if you're entering into contracts for a certain amount of money or greater than. For subcontractors, you might not have exactly those same issues, but you may, depending on the type of work that you're doing, is it residential, is it commercial, is it home improvement, there can be a raft of licensing issues involved.
So kind of looking at the other end, we talked about communicating with the licensing authorities and asking clear questions and being prepared. One of our listeners asked, so what information do you not want to share with the licensing authorities? What's dangerous?
I think that sometimes you want to be a little more, to tell you the truth, I would most of the time advise that you be forthcoming with the authority because you want to get an accurate answer. If you have perhaps already, if you're a contractor and you've perhaps already done some jobs in the municipality, and then someone said to you, oh, do you have the contractor registration? Some, client or other person within the municipality. When you call to ask questions about that or to apply, you might not want to necessarily mention we've been doing contracting services in this jurisdiction now for 8 months. But for the most part, trying to hide things from these authorities, in terms of your business activities, is going to get you an inaccurate answer. So I would say for the most part, be truthful, be clear.
Yeah, a good follow-up to this question is from one of our listeners that said, wouldn't it be wise in many instances to acquire licensing information anonymously? And I'll lead you into this. We often do audit and gap work for a number of our clients that don't have the staff to do that on their own. And a prerequisite is that we'll contact licensing authorities without revealing who the client is, and then try to collect what's the appropriate licensing information and go do an audit back at the client location without having revealed that we may be under licensed in that licensing authority. Any other instances where you might contact them anonymously?
Usually that's the instance also when we're doing business license research for planning purposes. If we have a client who wants to roll out a product line and they want to know, would I need a business license to do this kind of work in this municipality? Would I need building permits? Because we've researched those as well. So they can determine what kind of product do I want to roll out and where do I want to roll it out, in priority. What's the easier jurisdictions, what's the more difficult jurisdictions. In that instance, when we're doing research essentially for planning purposes, we oftentimes will contact the authority anonymously. It takes a little doing, I have to say, especially if you're dealing with contractor licensing issues. The municipality will push back oftentimes, and they will ask you, well, what's the address where you're going to be doing the work, and what company are you working for, and are you going to be going door to door? And in that instance, you may have to dance around a little bit. You may have to, essentially say, no, we're not going to be doing door to door. I can't disclose. It's a confidential relationship, but this is a large, nationally recognized company, and everything will be done in compliance and above board.
Okay. And I know one of the things that I've heard you talk about, Lorraine, as you call on behalf of clients is don't be afraid, to be an advocate for yourself and to try to get across what you might feel is an improper definition or kind of categorization of what you're doing. A good example might be, if someone has an element where they're a secondhand dealer and someone wants to treat them as a recycler. They need to advocate for themselves that, no, we're really not a recycler. Don't put that label on me as well. So I think the good advice that we've gotten over a number of projects from Lorraine and her team is make sure that you fight for yourself when you talk to these people as well, but be informed as you do it.
And also be courteous and be very professional. You don't want to you don't want them to feel that they're being patronized or that you're pointing out a mistake. You want to have an honest and fair dialogue. Do I actually fit within this definition? So treat them with respect.
Good advice.
Just like your mom always told you.
She was right again.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a handful of technical questions that I think are probably interesting to everybody. You talked about fingerprint scanning a little while ago. I don't know if you can answer this, but what kind of licenses could this require if you were using it as a sign-in feature for the registers?
Well, that's an interesting question. When I spoke of fingerprint scanning as prerequisite to obtaining licenses, primarily we see this a lot, not only as secondhand dealer licenses, but in financial and regulatory licenses. To the extent that you are using it as a sign-in feature at your business, say you're a health club, and this is how you track your customers and when they sign in. Actually, I have my son's orthodontist uses this way of checking in for an appointment, that my son puts down his right index finger, and that's how all the patients log in. There are certain restrictions, depending on where you are, regarding privacy, not sharing those fingerprints, and think of it in terms of almost like a weights and measures type of situation where that equipment that you're using has to meet certain standards. And it has to be accurate, and it has to be serviced and or installed in a certain way. So yes, it can lead to certain instances, especially privacy requirements and concerns.
Okay. You talked about geocodes a little while ago, and we got a question from someone who says, what is that, and how might I go about using those to determine proper license jurisdictions?
Well, I don't know the exact specifics of this magical thing. Here at Business Licenses, we have a tool that we use for this. Essentially, you put in an address, a full address, and it will tell you where that falls geographically. It's within this county, within this city. And that is it. And you can also do a similar, I believe you can either purchase or somehow download something similar, although not quite as extensive, from Google Maps or Google Earth, I think it is.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that most people in the sales tax business are relatively familiar with a handful of geocoding tools, and it's simply a particular coding that allows you to get even closer than a ZIP+4 in terms of locating where the actual facility or service is taking place. So that gives you a more accurate depiction of what your licensing might require. There are tools I will try to answer that question offline as well to guide you to some tools that could help you with that. But a ZIP+4 is generally considered a fairly close estimator of what you need, geocode being the most accurate. Another relatively technical question with a legal bend to it. It says a lot of applications require a driver's license and personal information for the corporate officers. Question is it legal for them to ask for that?
Well, at the risk of giving legal advice, which I'm not doing, by the way, yes, it is legal for them to ask for that. And in instances relating to regulated licenses, financial licenses, anything that involves secondhand, door-to-door soliciting, they have every right to ask for that, and most likely will ask for that. And there's not, I mean, pretty much your only recourse is to not apply for the license if you don't want to disclose that information.
Yeah, and I think what we've learned over time, Lorraine, is that companies that are national in scope get bowed up over this because it often means that somebody's got to fly somewhere or show up at a remote fingerprinting office sometimes, or show up at an office in person. Any advice on how you get around that or minimize that?
Actually, you know, as time goes on and progress marches on in terms of the internet and all these wonderful computer tools we have, we're seeing the advent of live scan fingerprints, and oftentimes municipalities and, you know, state to state, they're accepting live scans from other jurisdictions as well, especially if you are an out-of-state company and your principals or owners are not located within the state that you're currently applying for. So they are starting to coordinate and to work together. We're seeing more and more business license forms and applications online. We're seeing more and more consolidation as well as online applications where you can literally apply online. So they're sharing information. So you might not have to go from state to state to state and give your fingerprints.
Okay, so it's getting a little.
So that's a welcome development.
Good. Well, here's this to me is the punchline question when you've got an attorney on the phone. It says, so let's say you call a licensing authority and you get Sally, the licensing clerk, and she gives you information that says you don't really need a particular license, and it turns out maybe later that you do. Are you liable or not?
Yes, you are.
So what do you do about that?
Yes, you are. You cannot simply rely on what the office staff tells you. To a certain extent, depending on the type of license and depending on who you're speaking to, if you can get it in writing and you're talking to, let's say it's an issue that involves the police department or a building department, and you're talking to the person who's actually in charge, and you get it in writing, that might give you a foot up. But in terms of, you were talking to Sally, the licensing clerk, and you said, I'm coming into this municipality to do X, Y, and Z. And she said, oh, no, you don't need a license. Don't worry about it. The onerous is on the business owner to adequately research, to look at the municipal codes or ordinances, to look through whatever's available in terms of licenses or forms online, and to make that determination. It is not the municipality's job to figure out which licenses you need.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Well, so that leaves you kind of hanging in a lurch if you get to the wrong person. So the follow-up question to this is, because so many agency staff give wrong or conflicting answers, should we only really consider what they tell us as guidelines and then follow up with a statutory citation in every instance?
I think that that's a very good question. I wouldn't say that so often they give us wrong or conflicting information. Obviously a much higher percentage than we would like. But you also need to temper that with the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. If you have not given them adequate information, if you have not explained yourself sufficiently as to what you're going to be doing in that jurisdiction, you can't possibly expect that they're going to give you an accurate answer. So you have to consider that as well. And that's one of the reasons why we spent time today talking about this, about how to identify what you're doing, how to really look at it so that you can let these licensing authorities know with some clarity what it is you're going to be doing. And that should help. I always, having said that, I always look for a statutory citation. I always look at the code. I always look online to see if there's any conflict. To tell you the truth, it's not, there is nothing about this process that is 100% certain. I do this every day, all day long, and I don't really know how people have very complicated licensing. If that's not your full-time job, I'm not 100% sure how you do it accurately all the time in every instance, because it's very time-consuming.
I follow you. Well, we have more questions than we have time for. We promised everyone that we would wrap this up in an hour. So I want to make sure that we're sensitive to everyone's time. Thank you all for joining us. So just a couple wrap-up things. Number one, we will have the presentation posted on the Business License Solutions website. That's businesslicensesolutions.com. We'll also have it on the businesslicenses.com website. In addition, we will be sending out to you as just kind of a gift the spreadsheet that Lorraine spoke of, which is her checklist for performing adequate research and following all the steps. We, in a previous webinar, also had a licensing calendar, so if anyone is interested in having a licensing calendar tool that will help them organize their licenses a little more cleanly, please contact us and we'll be glad to work that out for you as well. So that concludes our webinar for today. We hope you'll join us next month. We plan to take on a pretty challenging topic, which we'll be talking about the impact of gross receipts on business licenses and what people have done about that. So if we didn't get to your question today, we apologize. We will follow up with you in writing, and we'll certainly circle back with everyone to find out what kinds of topics you'd like to see in our webinar series. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Take care.